Hi, everybody. Jim Ostrowski back with the Liberty Moving podcast. Quickly growing. It's the latest thing. It's happening now. I got my Oxford hat on today. My daughter went there because I think it's going to rain. So we talk about MAGA and ideology today. Let's see if I have any announcements. Getting an award from the Constitutional Coalition Thursday. It's a Christmas party. I'm not going to be selling books there. All my books are online for perfect last-minute Christmas gifts. I get no funding from anybody, so I remain completely independent. That's why I can say whatever the fuck I want about anybody, and I have. And I pissed a lot of people off doing it. So to keep independent, I try to monetize my activities, and that way I can keep going. Believe me, I sold 27 books recently at 2 events, and that helped pay the mortgage. So your purchases help support my activities. What I'm doing is pretty unique. If I'm silenced, there's not going to be anybody talking about the issues that I'm talking about. So, like the issue today, MAGA needs an ideology. Who else is talking about this? Who else has even noticed that MAGA doesn't have an ideology? Well, I'm a bit of a fanatic on the subject of ideology. A little dog barking. Not a little dog, but barking anyway. I wrote Progressivism, a Primer, is about ideology. I'm working on a book called Leftism, on Leftism. I'm working on a book called Archism. These are ideologies. And, this is an important topic. So when I say MAGA doesn't have an ideology, first of all, I've indicated in prior podcasts that MAGA is a separate political party. Nobody seems to have noticed this. I've noticed it. And it's true. So MAGA, there's 3 parties, the Democrats, the Republicans, and MAGA. The ideology of the Republican Party is basically, I think you would say, right-wing progressivism. And that's why the Republican Party has not eliminated a single progressive program since 1913. They're just sort of a different brand of progressivism. Progressivism may be at a lower speed limit, but it's right-wing progressivism. It's not leftism. The Democrats are basically a left progressive party. So there are these ideologies, and they're very powerful because these are the mindsets that people take into politics. And when, how many issues come up in politics? Like 500? And nobody's going to sit down there and sort of study each issue individually and somehow magically, without a major premise, without a principle, figure out what to do. That's like pragmatism. We'll talk a little bit about pragmatism, because really, I've always said Trump is a pragmatist. We'll get into that too. So, what's an ideology? There's no magic definition. It's just, and when I say ideology, if you study political science, ideology is a pejorative term in some contexts. And I kind of agree with that, frankly. I view ideology as a pejorative term, but it also has a non-pejorative meaning. In other words, it's just the basic philosophy that you bring to politics, and presumably that philosophy is the result of, well, it depends. But we would like to think, let's put it that way, that an ideology is the result of, the greatest minds pondering the great issues at a high level of abstraction, and then the ideologues come along and say, okay, Aristotle said this. How do we apply what Aristotle said to, I got Kenmore Avenue here, so it's going to be a little choppy. Oh, I lucked out. I don't even have to press the button, which I never do anyway. So, Aristotle said this about justice, so how can we take Aristotle's insight about justice and use that in practical politics? So I guess ideology, in a sense, I'm thinking out loud here, is political philosophy applied to practical politics. So you have to have an ideology. If you don't have an ideology, you're unwittingly using somebody else's ideology, and you're fooling yourself. So a lot of people, boy, I'm talking loud, got quiet all of a sudden. So a lot of people, I don't want to scare the squirrels. Let's talk about this notion of common sense. I'm going to not be too concerned about the order of ideas here, just sort of cover everything I want to cover. You're deluding yourself if you think that you're going to, I'm going to use common sense. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're just, when you say, I'm going to use, let's say, the minimum wage, the leftists and the progressives say, we have to guarantee a living wage. And the libertarians say, you're just making people unemployed. Stupid. So, what is to determine the proper position on the minimum wage, you have to have an ideology. You have to have a philosophy. Now, the libertarians bring with them economics, and the progressives actually can never cite economics because it would violate their ideology. So you have to bring in some sort of other bodies of thought other than what you claim is your common sense. Sorry, I got a little watery eyes today. Weird. So you have to have an ideology. Common sense is not going to do it. And when you say, you may think you're using your common sense, but you're not. You're like the progressive who thinks, well, geez, we got to have a minimum wage, or people got to eat and pay their rent and all that stuff. They think they're using their common sense, but actually they're using an ideology, and they're just not aware of it. So common sense is bullshit when it comes to politics, and you're deluding yourself if you think you're using common sense. You're not. You're using, it's a metaphysical necessity that in making an argument, let's get into philosophy 101. The basic form of an argument is the syllogism, and there's a general principle. You apply the general principle to a specific set of facts, and you reach a conclusion. So, if you're reaching a conclusion about politics, what you've done is you've applied a general principle to a particular set of facts, and you've drawn a certain conclusion. So basically, I hate to beat a dead horse, but it's important to beat this dead horse because it's not dead. There's people who think you can use common sense. So what you're doing when you say you use common sense is you've got your conclusion. You've applied some principle to the specific set of facts to reach the conclusion, but you're just in denial about the general principle you used to do it. So common sense is bullshit. So when Trump came along, it was pretty obvious. I got my heated gloves on today. They're a little cumbersome. There's got to be a better way, but I'll figure it out. Actually, a nice day. It's starting to rain a little bit, but it's not going to bother me. So when Trump came along, it's pretty obvious to me, and I said so at the time. It's like 8 years ago. He's got sort of an ideology. Let's call it an ideology for the moment. Populist nationalism. And I think Steve Bannon on his show has used the same term. He didn't get it from me. I didn't get it from him. I think I said it first. Maybe he did. Who cares? So Trump's a populist nationalist. That's true. Is that an ideology? It's actually not, and we'll prove that before we get to Hurdle Avenue. It's H-E-R-T-L-E, not H-U-R-D-L-E. Pretty funny, Josh Allen reference. But beyond the issues where populist nationalism applies, such as trade and immigration, these are the obvious examples. Foreign wars also. Trump's a pragmatist, and you see this all the time. He he just sort of willy-nilly announces what he thinks about something. Now, the guy's got good political intuition, I admit, but here's the problem with pragmatism. And if you read Progressivism, a primer, you'll know much more about this. So pragmatism, let's distinguish between pragmatism and practicality. So pragmatism is actually a school of philosophy. It's a mistaken school of philosophy in my view, that comes along in the late 19th century. The leading proponents of it are Thomas Dewey, Charles Peirce, and William James, the brother of Henry James, the novelist. So the pragmatist basically says, look, there's no such thing as truth. So let's focus in on action, and we'll do stuff. And in the process of doing stuff, somehow, and I think this is idiotic, moronic philosophy, we'll somehow stumble into the truth while we're in the middle of the project. It's just fucking bullshit. It's bullshit. It's a very pernicious philosophy. And my contention is, I spent a couple pages in Progressivism talking about this. My contention is that pragmatism is the sort of the philosophy underlying progressivism. If you want to look at progressivism in the light of it's somewhat rational, or it's attempting to be rational. But so pragmatism is really, and I'll drill down into this because this is important. Pragmatism is sort of the intellectual bodyguard of progressivism. Small p, Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, Lyndon Johnson, small p progressivism, not leftism, please. So, what's the problem is, again, the problem with pragmatism is it's pretty obvious that it provides. So you're gonna find out what works. You're gonna do stuff. You're gonna experiment, right? And you're gonna find out what works. Okay, so what's the criterion of whether it's gonna work or not? Duh, there's no criteria. That's why it's an idiotic, moronic philosophy, pragmatism. So the problem with pragmatism is that for reasons I'm not absolutely positive of, but I know it's true, the pragmatism is biased in favor of doing stuff. So, and you're talking about politics, so the pragmatist is going to say, well, let's do something. We got to do something. It's like, no, you don't. But in order to realize that, no, you don't, or that instead of doing something about any X problem, minimum wage or whatever, the libertarian would say, well, wait a second, how about undoing something? It's like, and the pragmatists say, wait a second, Pierce, Dewey, and James told me I got to do something. No, you got to undo something. You got to undo the shit you did for 70 years, which is how you got where you are now. But the pragmatist doesn't want to do that. So I don't have to prove this philosophically. I think I already did, kind of. But as a practical matter, pragmatism always defaults into progressive government, experimenting. Let's try something, and then there's no criterion for failure. So you never get out of the experiment. It's an endless experiment. We've had this endless experiment in progressivism since 1913. And it's my contention, and I proved it in my book. I took the major programs. I could take the minor programs, or what's the point? I proved every single one of these programs has failed. Every single progressive program has failed. And I proved that empirically through the book. I could prove it logically, metaphysically, whatever, you name it. In other words, when I say metaphysical, in other words, if you understand what progressivism is, and again, I'm talking about Trump's default ideology, other than populist nationalism, which I'll get into in a second. If you understand what progressive government is, the use of aggressive force in only 6 ways. Government only does 6 things. Government only does 6 things. All of these things involve the use of aggressive government force. In every single one of these 6 things, it's taxation, regulation, inflation, the other things I've listed. They're in the book. Every single one of these things reduces the wealth of society, harms people. And so we don't have to do, this is why you need an ideology. And libertarians, of course, is the ideology. I'll get into that in a second. You don't have to do an experiment. You do a mental experiment. Like, if you have the redistribution of wealth, which is basically all our government does. They're talking about cutting the federal budget. We'll get into that in a second. But basically, if you look at what the federal government does, it's not this, we got to get the employees back to work, or the employees are, no, that's bullshit. That's such bullshit. That's just like GOP con job bullshit. What the government really does is just redistribute wealth. Sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. They just redistribute wealth. Okay, so let's do this thought experiment, whatever. Let's not waste a century figuring out what we already fucking know through logic. So you're going to have 3 groups in society. You're going to have the tax collectors, and then they collect the taxes, and then people are going to, and then the taxpayers, and then the tax recipients. Okay, so in a redistributionist state, which is what we have, still waiting for the Doge committee to hire me as an unpaid volunteer consultant. It's like, what are they waiting for? So you divided society into 3 groups. So what's the effect on the productivity of each group? Well, the tax collectors are just going to sit on their butts collecting taxes. They're not going to do any work. They're not going to produce widgets. They're not going to sling coffee. I'm going to Dash's, by the way, for my coffee. Buy local for liberty. No, they don't pay me for the ads. The tax collectors are going to work less hard than they would if they weren't tax collectors. We don't have to do an experiment in this, folks. We fucking know it. We know it through pure logic. 2, the people who get the money. Well, they're sitting on their butts getting the money. They're not going to do any fucking work. We know that. We don't even have to do an experiment in this shit. And then finally, and this one's a little tougher nut to crack, the taxpayers. Well, so we kind of know how this works. If you're not going to work as hard, you're not going to work as hard if some goofball's taking half of what you own. And if they're taking 100% of what you own, you're just going to sit there and wait till they shove a cattle prod up your butt, and then maybe you'll work at that point like the old slave system in the South. Minus the cattle prods. They had other things. So, in the technical reason, I'm delving into some Austrian economics here, but the technical reason is that they're not taxing your leisure time. So you can get 100% of the psychic income from leisure, but if you actually work in the marketplace, you're only getting half of the benefits, so you're going to sort of slack off a little bit. I know that's a little technical, but the bottom line is we will work a lot harder. People, let's put it this way. Let's just look at it in terms of investing. Maybe it makes a little bit more sense there. I'm going to put my if I can earn 100% of my net profit without paying taxes, I'm going to be out there like tossing my money here and tossing my money there. Not stupidly, but the best investments I can think of. And but if you're taking half of it, it's like, well, hey, sorry, Joe, I like your idea, but my calculus is I'm not going to make enough money after taxes, so I'm not going to give you the investment. So I think it's pretty clear. So look, we don't, I could go through everything government does and it'd be the same analysis. We don't have to piss away another 111 years on progressivism. So President Trump, forget the fucking forget the pragmatism, because that's really just disguised. Oh, I got to get a better selfie stick. That's so annoying every time I come here. Okay. So we don't need pragmatism. That's bullshit. We don't need common sense. That's bullshit. And we don't need fucking progressivism, obviously. We don't need right-wing progressivism. So let's talk about, so I've proven that most of the MAGA ideology is bullshit. Let's talk about populism and nationalism. So these are undoubtedly coherent ideas. I don't think they're ideologies. I think they're mindsets. And, these words can cross over, and there's a little bit of ambiguity here. So, now, interesting, parenthetically, let me say that a lot of libertarians don't like populism because they think it implies some sort of redistribution of wealth. And there's some basis for that if you look at the history of populism. But the concept of populism, I'm a little autistic, so my camera's got to be freaking straight. It just annoys the hell out of me. So, I'm working on using the selfie stick in a somewhat more efficient manner. It'll correct itself. So, but to me, populism is a very libertarian idea. Populism simply means, in my view, the government should do what is in the interest of average persons. Okay, well, that's libertarianism, okay? But I have to prove that. I'm not just saying that. Take my word for it. So I have no problem with populism. That's fine. And let's talk about nationalism. Now, this is much more controversial. The globalist wing, the Beltway libertarians, the Cato people, and some people in the other wings of the libertarian movement do not like nationalism. So when I say, what do we mean by nationalism? I don't mean nationalism in the sense of, Yeah, I got to get a better selfie stick, I'm sorry. I don't mean nationalism in the sense of military nationalism or economic nationalism. I just mean something, again, like populism, a very simple idea, which is that the U.S. government, should do what is in the interest of Americans, as opposed to the interests of other countries. And so that concept of nationalism is perfectly consistent with libertarianism. It really is. In fact, libertarians believe in, I think libertarians should believe in local control as opposed to sort of globalism, although the Cato people would disagree with me, and they're wrong. And anytime you guys want to debate me, let me know. That'll be fun. Fly me down to, well, I don't fly locally, but drive me down to D.C. and we'll have a little debate. See who wins that one. But here's the problem with local. This might have to lapse into a second podcast. So here's the problem with MAGA has an ideology. It's called populist. No, it really doesn't, because when you say, well, let's have the government do what's in the interest of the average person, and I don't mean average and ordinary. I mean unconnected to the political system. In other words, the working class. The government should do what's good for the working class, regular Americans, not the political class, not the deep state, not the Beltway insiders. Okay, here's the question. Well, what the fuck is that? Okay, it doesn't answer itself. It begs the question, in other words. What is in the interest of the average person? You got to prove that. In order to prove it, or explain what it is, you have to have an ideology. MAGA doesn't have a fucking ideology. I think I've already proven that. Let's talk about nationalism. Well, nationalism, we're going to do what's in the interest of Americans. Well, some Americans think the interest of Americans is to protect Israel. And we fought like 3 fucking wars and pissed away $3 trillion. And there's a lot of dead men and women at Arlington and other cemeteries. Other people think, no, fuck the Middle East. It's not our problem. Stay out. You see what I'm saying? Nationalism doesn't answer the question of what the fuck we're going to do. It's just a mindset. It's an opening, okay, we're having a meeting. Okay, we're all for nationalism, right? Okay. Now, what does it mean? Now I got to figure out what it fucking means. And libertarians know what it means because we have an ideology, the ideology that created the modern world. And then was abandoned in 1913, and everything's been fucked up ever since. That's why we need an ideology, folks. So let's talk about free trade. Well, or protectionism. Well, obviously we have to protect our domestic industries. Well, no, you don't. You don't. What do you mean? You know, Tom DiLorenzo is a very good friend of mine. Runs Mises now. Lou retired from CEO. I think he's still chair of the board. He had a podcast the other day with Ryan McMakin, fabulous. Tom's kind of the leading expert on tariffs and their effect. He said, "Well, what does protectionism protect us from?" And he said, "Low prices, low prices." So I talk about trade a lot in progressivism, and my aphorism is, what protectionism protects is progressivism. Why? Because we have raised the cost through a myriad of taxes and regulations. We have raised the cost of employing somebody. And so what do people do? People buy products from overseas they can't afford. I'm a buy local for liberty guy. Some of these things I can't afford. I'm not wealthy enough to buy the things that I want, and I have to go overseas because the government, our own fucking government, has made our American labor too fucking expensive. So why, President Trump, why are you protecting progressivism? Fuck progressivism. So, again, without an ideology, you don't know what the trade policy is going to be. Oh, no, it's got to be good for America. I know, but what is the policy that's good for Americans? Libertarians say it's free trade, real free trade, not the corporatist bullshit of Bill Clinton and all that NAFTA bullshit. That's all corporatist, corrupt bullshit. You don't have, as Murray Rothbard used to say, you don't have to have a 3,000-page free trade treaty. You could write that in 2 sentences. So I think I've proven my point. I'm almost out of park space. Here's the bottom line. MAGA does not have an ideology. Without one, guess what? MAGA's going to lose to the forces in Washington that do have an ideology or that are driven purely by corruption. And they use an ideology to mask the corruption. Progressivism has that twofold purpose, as you would know if you read the book Progressivism, a Primer. So MAGA needs an ideology. If it doesn't, it's going to get its ass kicked. There is an ideology. It's called libertarianism. It created the fucking modern world from 1776, all the way through to 1913. Lots of flaws, lots of inconsistencies, not applied fully and consistently, but it created the modern world, made the United States into the greatest country on earth for average people unconnected to the political system. We have the ideology, folks. We figured all this shit out a long time ago. So, that's my point. There's a libertarian fork in the road. Explained this many times. We're taking the fork. One of the forks is the MAGA Libertarian Alliance. I'm working on it as hard as I can, folks, but I can't do it alone. I'm just a guy in a baseball hat in Shoshone Park.